Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all again. Between Spiritual Renewal Week at Ananda Village, some special projects for Swami Kriyananda, his first program in Los Angeles, I think it's been 3 weeks since David and I have been standing here. And even though, of course, we enjoy wherever we are, it has been a long absence, and we're very glad to be back with all of you again. All of our plans at the present moment are to be here. We have the promise of spending some time helping us start the work in Los Angeles, but those plans are so obscure and unspecific at this point that, at least for my own sanity, I've just put them on the shelf and we'll just wait and see. Something surely will come of it, but we don't know what it will be. So for those of you who enjoy our company, you'll probably have plenty of it. For those of you who don't, well, there you are. Usually when I'm absent, I write letters, and I jokingly say people sometimes enjoy my letters more than my company, so that compensates. But in any case, we're all in this together, friends. Where any devotee is uplifted, then all of us are uplifted. One of my dear friends had a beautiful dream once in which she saw the great many of the Ananda family just all holding hands in a big circle. And what she saw was it was a super conscious dream. It was really lovely. That every so often someone would turn into pure light, and then their form would just vaporize, and they would rise up as light, and the space would be filled in. Everybody would hold hands again. But the most notable part of the dream to her was that when anyone was turned into light, everyone felt an equal sense of joy. And she herself, even at the time, noticed that there was no part of her that thought, "Oh, I wish it was me," like that. But just this feeling that we're all part of this divine tapestry, and wherever there is light, that light is for all of us. Now, to a certain extent, that's really very relevant to this reading that we had today, which we could probably spend about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 Sundays just going through all different pieces of it, because there's just so many dimensions, starting right from the beginning with this so often I would say misused, but this quote from Jesus, "All who came before me are thieves and robbers," which is sort of like a weapon, like a hatchet in the hand of people who have some inclination to need to stand up and be right and to declare their rightness against others. And they can become, seemingly authorized by Jesus himself, great defenders of the faith. When I was reflecting on this, I was trying to think a thief or a robber has to see something desirable and has to somehow have the ability to get it. I mean, you can desire something, but if you can't break into the house and get it. When we went to India on one of our trips, we had a layover of like 9 or 10 hours in London. One of the trips we were taking when we were taking a group over, and friends were with us who knew the city of London very well, and he took us out of the airport and we did this sort of rapid mini tour of London, which involved getting on this escalator to go up and see the crown jewels of England, which are really worth seeing. Precious jewels are crystals, and crystals have consciousness, and really big, beautiful jewels have really interesting consciousness. But everything, of course, was designed to keep a thief or a robber from getting his hands on those jewels. And you kind of get on this moving sidewalk and you get to peer at these things like this, and they're all set up and the guards are all there. And no matter how much you desire to grab them, there's no possibility that you can. And they're very well defended. There they are. They're just right in front of you. Now, Jesus is saying, everyone who came before me is a thief and a robber. So you have to ask yourself, Jesus described himself by saying, even the foxes have a hole in which they can go to sleep, but I, the Son of Man, have no place to lay my head. He described himself in all respects. Who is my father? Who is my mother, except those who love God? Take not the thought for the morrow. Take not an extra cloak or a bag of food. God will take care of you. Look at the lilies in the field, how beautifully they are attired. You think your heavenly Father won't take care of you? Like, what exactly is going to be stolen from Jesus? Certainly not his stuff, because he doesn't have any stuff. right? Do we think we're going to like take his reputation from him? Like he didn't really have a good one, as you recall. He was crucified as a thief. He was tortured. He was spit upon. I mean, even his own disciples at the very end of his life became anxious. He was betrayed by one of his own. So like somebody's going to write a bad editorial to the newspaper about him. You know, what could they take from him? His own relationship to God? Now, how can anybody take that from anyone? Of course, he was, as he declared himself, one with the Father. Be ye therefore perfect. That which I do, ye shall do, and greater things. He put himself in that intimate relationship, and even if you have any esoteric understanding, you can read it more deeply. Even at his birth, the star, which they called his star, stood over the manger, which was an esoteric reference to the star of the spiritual eye that devotees see, his star. He owned the infinite consciousness from the moment of his incarnation. So who could be a thief and who could be a robber? And how could such a being require people like us to stand up and say, yes, he was the Son of God, why not? I recall when I was 10 years old, we were Jewish, and the question arose in my mind quite naturally, how come we weren't Christians? Why had we, I don't mean why wasn't my family Christian, but why weren't all Jews Christians? Like, what happened back there? Like, Jesus came, he was supposed to be the Messiah, but like somehow he wasn't. So I said to my poor father, I say poor father because of the look that came over his face, which as an adult now I understand much more. Daddy, why wasn't he the Messiah? You know, and just my father, like, I think if I'd asked him the facts of life, it would have been easier for him. It was like he didn't, and then he hemmed and hawed. He was an honest man and a bright man, and he did his very best to satisfy my 10-year-old mind, but it became quite clear to me that he didn't have the foggiest idea. He didn't have any idea. It was just like, well, that's what makes us Jews, pretty much. So I changed the subject. I still remember, isn't it interesting how memories stay with you? I mean, there was no indication at that time that I would end up where I am now, but obviously some part of me knew. And much as I loved him and respected him, I thought, these are not questions to ask this man. We have to find someone else, which of course I eventually did in Swami Kriyananda, who could answer that question really well. But there you are. He was what he was because he was. It wasn't anybody having to declare it. It was because it was his consciousness. So there's one explanation that what he's talking about, which is teachers who put their egos in front of the presence of God, are stealing the credit which belongs to the infinite, and they're trying to take it upon themselves. Even as Swami writes in this, when Paramhansa Yogananda would speak of himself as the guru and people were his disciples, but he would never, in the sense that he would initiate them as disciples, he would give them his commitment, he would ask of them his obedience, but his own awareness was that there was no separate reality to this form that people perceived as Paramhansa Yogananda, that was standing there in a body, whose face can be photographed, whose eyes you can see in the pictures that are on the altar behind me and the other masters, but his own awareness of himself was merely as a window. And if we look at the brightness of the light coming through that window, and the window had sufficient ego to say, oh yes, don't I shine beautifully? Shouldn't you really pay a lot of attention to me? You know, shouldn't you bring me good things to eat and lots of money and pretty girls if I want them? Because look at how bright the light is. You would think that the window was crazy. Because you self-evidently look at it, and all it has done is framed that which exists, framed that which is radiating anyway, and this has merely given us a square through which we can see it. The masters don't have to discipline themselves not to become ego-aware. It's completely incomprehensible to them, because the reality of their own existence and their relationship to this universe and the relationship to the infinite simply is. Swami Kriyananda, when he was in India in 1958 to 1962, He had the opportunity to have a very close, loving relationship with a woman saint named Ananda Ma. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Master describes her, the joy-permeated mother. She lived until 1982, so he had the chance to meet her. Actually, David met her also. He went to India earlier than any of the rest of us and had a private meeting with her also. Most of the rest of us came too late. But Swamiji was favored by her. She was very magnetized by his pure spirituality, truthfully. And she said many complimentary things, such as, of all those who have come before this body, she never called herself I. She called it this body. And for her, it wasn't an affectation. In the 60s and in the 70s, when people were having experiences that were not entirely natural for their consciousness, a lot of times people would affect sort of pretentious ways of calling themselves, my favorite being this unit of consciousness, which would be said with so much ego involvement that it would be so comic. But Ananda Ma truly could never say I, because I to her meant infinite, so she would say this body. And she said of Swami Kriyananda, of all those who have passed before this body, no one has drawn from me as you have drawn. So she was she poured out love and attention to him. And at one point, Swamiji said, you're so generous to me with all the time and attention that you give me. And Ananda Ma's answer was so perfect. She said, oh, is that how it looks to you? And when Swamiji contemplated that, and I think even later spoke to her about it, it was that Swamiji looked at her and saw an individual, saw a one person moving through and thinking that that person was doing something. But Ananda Ma never saw herself as anything but just an integrated part of the infinite. And for him to single her out and say, oh, you're doing something so generous, you're so selfless, you're so kind, her only response was, oh, is that how you see it? There was nothing even in her that could attach to that. Now, anyone, whether they're acting the role of a spiritual teacher, whether you're a clerk in a retail store, whether you're raising a child, whether you're a famous politician, whatever you might be, if we take the power of infinite consciousness, which is really all that we are, and try to take that little piece out and carve it as our own, then we are a thief, and we are robbing from the infinite the credit, putting the credit where it really belongs. I came to a realization at a certain point that whenever people will say to me, after I've done something like I'm doing now, talking or something like that, someone will say, oh, you did such a good job. I realize that the only part that ever gets complimented is the part where I wasn't. You understand? Because to the extent to which one grabs it as one's own, then by definition one has taken the potential and narrowed it down to less than it could be. And then everyone wants you still to take credit. Well, you may be a channel, but somebody had to be a channel, didn't they? And I watch it with Swamiji, where the credit goes to God, but there's this great determination, that we can at least claim some part of it. Now, the real robbery that's taking place here, and this is the part that's the most relevant, we are robbing ourselves of our own potential for happiness. That's the real thief, that's the real robbery, which is that we have this capacity to be perfectly free, to be perfectly in bliss, to be Sat Chit Ananda. That is who we are. And we have never ceased to be that. That's the most fascinating part of this whole spiritual journey, is that it's not as if we even fall from that state and then have to work our way back or anything like that. We simply misperceive what is going on. And when we misperceive something, there's never any reality to that misperception except in our own tortured little brain. Isn't that so? We misperceive somebody's motive. You're mad at me. You've always been mad at me. I'm not. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Have you ever been in situations like that where someone has projected upon you some attitude that you really don't have, But they're absolutely certain. And the more you protest, the more it proves that you're in denial. And just pretty soon you just go get a book or just go somewhere else. There's just nothing you can do. Gee, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. And then you go away. There's nothing you can do about it. And how many times have we become anxious about something we thought might happen? That maybe this lump is cancer, or if it is cancer, maybe it means this, or maybe something's going to happen to my child, or all these different things we misperceive. And then when that misperception is cleared up, there's nothing there at all. It was never what we thought it was. This is very, very difficult for us to understand from our egoic perspective. Because darn it seems so real. And there's a much more complicated conundrum that's created, which was also implied in this reading today, which is why I'm saying it could go on forever, which is when we are, and I say we, which is that unique spark of divinity that will eventually rejoin the infinite and become a self-realized part of the infinite, it begins at stages of evolution. Master said it begins essentially at the crystal level, the level of a diamond. That's why you feel, I wear gemstones for astrological reasons, and any of you all who are involved in gems or crystals, there's a living force in that inert element. Even though it can't pick itself up and walk anywhere, still there's some consciousness there. Swamiji said once that crystals are the transition point between energy and matter. I mean, where matter turns into consciousness. It's very interesting. And Yogananda said he could remember himself back to the level of a diamond, which is one of those comments that just makes your head spin. You don't know where to go with it. But in any case, there you have it. But the way the masters describe it is that evolution is automatic through the minerals, through the plants, through the animal stages. That there is insufficiently defined ego to have enough self-awareness to consciously decide the direction of your consciousness. Your dog or your cat could be highly evolved, seemingly, could have many expansive qualities, and as animals become pets, they do develop a more and more refined awareness. But as I've said sometimes, the dog can't say, let me see. Now, I've heard from the Bhagavad Gita that if I practice these certain teachings, then it will make me feel better, so I'm going to discipline myself in the systematic way. Even if the animal is wonderfully warm and loyal, it simply does not have the ego development to be able to objectively reflect upon its own consciousness, be aware enough then to take action in order to increase its happiness. That is a quality of awareness that requires that we've come to the human level. Now, of course, once we come to the human level, and I'm talking about many, many lifetimes that this takes, what we begin to have is we begin to have the possibility of observing our own situation and making a decision. And when people become conscious of the fact that food tastes good, that sex is marvelous, that power over people is, seems to give me all these things I want, we don't immediately think, oh, what I think I'll do is I'll realize God. We take the very first thing that we see. You can see it in little children. They see it, they want it. They see it, they want it. In fact, interestingly, one of the tests that they developed for, quote, the emotional IQ, which is the real test of success in a person's life, people are beginning to say, is the capacity to perceive the benefit of delayed gratification. And they actually did these little tests with little children, and they'd put them in a room with a cookie. And they'd leave them alone in the room with the cookie. And they had a little video on this. I saw these little videos somewhere. They leave them alone with a cookie. And they say, if you can sit in here with this cookie for 5 minutes, when I come back, I'll give you 2. Right? And you would watch the children, and some of them, it was just no question. The man left, they ate the cookie. And then some of them were perfectly content to wait for 2 cookies, and others would pick up the cookie and put it down, and pick up the cookie and put it down, eat half the cookie, a quarter of the cookie, try to make a bargain, because this is what we're working with. We're working with the immediate sensation, And then the possibility of building up greater energy for greater benefit if I deny the immediate sensation because, not because I'm going to suffer more later, but because it will give me more later. Now, isn't that exactly what the entire story is about, even now? Aren't we just in a room with one cookie? And are we going to grab it? You know, am I just going to be furious at you because you said something I didn't like? Am I just going to follow this impulse to just eat ice cream, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream, until I become like this and they have to carry me out? You know? Am I going to follow this impulse to fall in love with this person or that person or grab this money? Or am I going to restrain what appears to me a pleasurable sensation because of the awareness that it's nothing compared to what will come to me later? So when we hear all of this extremely unattractive philosophy that says, give up your desires, don't follow your desires, reject your senses, don't take what you want, sacrifice, sacrifice, there's a certain part of you that just wants that cookie and wants it now. And it's a very confusing teaching in a certain sense, and there's sometimes even a big reaction against it. God wants me to have everything. God wants me to have it all now. There's a certain amount of new age, new thought that just repudiates the idea of any kind of self-discipline, really. But experience does not support that. It's really just as simple as that. Experience does not support that. The trouble is that experience happens over many lifetimes. And really, by the grace of God, our mind is blanked out and we just start over again. But you find children are so different. Some of those children recognize right away, do not eat this cookie because I could have a lot more cookies and it would be a lot better. And they don't even have to try. They just can sit there very comfortably. Because just because their bodies are small doesn't mean their souls are childish. They're as old as God, as Swamiji says. Everyone is infinite in age. They just have little bodies. And everything that we know, really know, it's because we've experienced it. It's because we've tried it out. And anyone who comes before me is a thief and a robber, which means anything that comes between me and my true infinite nature is stealing from me my birthright. And at first, one may take this as a dogma. At first, one may take it as a hard discipline. But gradually over time, time after time, life after life, when we discover that even though there's a strong impulse in an immediate direction, if I have the wisdom to hold my consciousness in the center of my awareness, I discover that what I truly seek comes in a completely different way. This is why the Bhagavad Gita says, desire is that which destroys discrimination. Intellect, mind, desire together. Even the wise get confused. Because it isn't always obvious. Because this world exists on two levels. There's the apparent outward drama, which says, among other things, that we're born and we die. That we're here and then we disappear. And then there's the inward perception that tells us, I have always been and I always will be. There's the apparent separateness of it, that if I can take it from you and get it from me, then that doesn't hurt me at all. And then there's the more subtle inward awareness, where we begin to feel and recognize, not merely as a theory, but as an actual experience, which we learn first from loving our own children and loving our own family. But gradually we realize it's the experience of love itself that is giving me this joy. It's the self-expansion beyond the limitations of my own little ego. That's what's giving me joy. First we think, it's having my baby and loving my baby, having my husband and loving my husband. But then gradually we begin to understand the operative word there is love. And even though there's a delight in the long and loving relationships that we build up over many incarnations that come back to us again and again in all these different forms. But what's really the bliss of that is the opportunity it gives us to open our hearts, to experience God's unconditional love, to define ourselves in an ever-expanding reality until we become infinity itself. That's the real bliss of it. And so this thought that we have to fight so hard becomes just the opposite. And we begin to see the hand of God in everything that happens. Think what extraordinary, whenever we know, even for a moment in our life, that this is exactly, that God is with me, that my guru is with me, that my guardian angel, however you want to say it, that a force greater and wiser than myself that really loves me is making this happen in my life. All of us know those moments. There's nothing more gratifying than that. Because there's an absolutely unshakable certainty of every quality that we desire. Imagine every moment of our consciousness can and will be exactly like that. And what the masters are giving us, quite simply, is the roadmap. And even though sometimes we think, oh, no, I think it lies that direction. Really, if the masters say, go over this hill, down this valley, through this tunnel, across this river, they have walked the path before us. And it behooves us to listen, and then with all our hearts to follow. Bless you.